I'm Clevett, welcome back to my channel. I'm going to do a little piece about second fixing. I'm just about to run some architraves around these new doors and linings that I've put in, and I get asked quite a lot about 18 gauge and 16 gauge nailers. So I'm going to talk a little bit about both and why I like to use both of them. I'm not sort of stuck on either one. So I'm going to first cut my architraves in, get them all ready to go and pin them up. Now, you may have seen other videos that I've done architraving on over on Skill Builder, and you may have noticed that I make them up like a picture frame. Now, this is particularly relevant with an MDF because when we used to use a softwood or even a hardwood architrave, we used to be able to put a fixing in through the mitre, glue them, put the fixing in through the mitre. So we would have put up a leg, then a head, and then a leg, or the head, and then both legs. And we would have put a pin in. Now, when you're fixing through the edge of MDF, it has a tendency to part. So we don't like to do that anymore. And also, it's super flat and comes in primed generally, so you don't really want to be sanding mitres and all that sort of stuff. Now, I'm using a flat board, and it's even more important to get those mitres nice and flat. So what I like to do is treat it like a picture frame, cut my legs, cut my head, mitre them all, and then I will glue them together with a really good quality mitre adhesive. I'll pick the whole frame up, I'll stand it against the opening, and I'll fix it. Now, I'll also be using an adhesive to minimize the amount of fixings that we need, which also saves on decorating, preparation, and that sort of stuff. But I do like a connection between the architrave and the lining by means of a pin. So I've always used a 16 gauge because that was probably the first gun I had out on site. It was a Pasload second fix nailer. But more recently, I've been using battery powered guns, and the 18 gauge one is a little bit more gentle, I suppose. It gives you a much tinier head. Now, pull out wise, because we're going to be using an adhesive behind them, you know, no one's ever going to rip these off. They're going to be really well attached, and the pins, as I say, hold them back nicely there and keep the whole thing in situ while it's going off. First thing is, I like a margin around my linings. Now, there's no set amount. Now, when I was at college, it was around about 3 or 4 millimeters or 1/8 of an inch. Since we've been using ball race butts, which have a much thicker knuckle, in some cases the knuckle is around about 7 mil, like 50% of it's around about 14 mil if you're using the larger hinges, then what we like to do is make sure that our architraves clears those hinges. Now, I'm a strong believer in making sure I do my work fast, efficient, but really nicely as well. I put the linings in, I made the linings, they're all exactly the same height, they're all exactly the same width, so I shall cut 4 heads and I shall cut 8 legs, all exactly the same, glue them as picture frames, stand them on the finished floor, bond them back and pin them. To set my margin, I will make a little rebate block up. You can use a combination square, you can slide the ruler back and you can give yourself a margin. I'll just knock myself a little rebated block up and I'll just put some marks on. Don't need many marks, just need one on the top, middle and bottom of the jamb to make sure it's straight when you fix it, and a couple in the corners to line it up. So out to the saw, rebate myself something up, and I'm going to use an 8mm margin. Great, have a sip of coffee. Can't beat a nice cup of coffee. So that's the margins I'm looking for. So all I need to do now is take one of my heads, transfer my marks, go and get those mitered. That's the first step. So I shall just pop a mark here. You could actually mitre one end and offer it up. I'm just going to do it like this. So that's my head. I like to mark out on the back which way the mitres are going so I don't go and cut one the wrong way because I'm only human, just like the rest of us out there. Then I'll take one of my legs. Now they've all got a very good end on the bottom. I'll whack this onto the finished floor, giving it a little push. Nice and flat. And I will mark the top. And I'll do the same here. One of those. I'll do one on the other side. They're all exactly the same. I could just go and cut them all exactly the same. But for demonstration, I will go like this. And here we go again. Now I'm going to go and cut 4 lefts, 4 rights, and 4 heads. I'm confident they're all the same because I made the linings and I didn't take anything off them. So they'll be perfect. So we'll get them done now. First quick check you always need to do with your mitre saw is make sure you're nice and plumb. If you're angled slightly when you cut the opposite mitre, you're going to have a nasty gap. We don't want that. And then generally speaking, if you look after your mitre saw, when you bring it round to what is 45, sometimes they've got a little bit of wobble. I just suggest you get it somewhere near perfectly in the middle, hard against the back of the fence, and then take your first mitre off. Now I'm using a flat board so I can actually mitre the backs with the saw set in the same direction without having to turn it round. And indeed, that should be the way you do cut for something with a face side, because you're going to cut up, a bit like using a circular saw. You'll always, if you've got a face side and you're using a circular saw, you cut from the back. But these saws and the blades are so fantastic, you just don't really get those issues. Now what I'm going to do is put the mitres on the ends of one, mark them off the template. I'll do all these together. That's it. We're going to get them all done. Mark those up. So if I was doing hundreds of these, I'd have my long length of timber and I'd just set a stop up, but I've only got a few doors to do. It's a little afternoon job. So one by one is fine. And there we have it. So we'll rattle those off. I'll do those individually, those. I won't try and line them all up like I did the first ones. Put those out of the way there. So that's the heads. Now we'll rattle out the legs. So we've got our first one here, which is, in fact what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut a pair at the same time because I can with these boards, and I've got this saw set so sweetly, it's an absolute dream. So I'm flushing the bottoms up, just going to keep them together, and then I'll keep them in pairs. Pull that down, and so there's one set there. Let's get the next set done. Flush the ends up. So I've got good square ends on the ends, so when they meet the floor they'll be absolutely spot on. It's all about lining it up with the eye, looking down the blade, you can't go wrong. And that's it, we're ready to go and put those together. So what I like to do now is glue them together with mitre adhesive. You all know this gear, you've all used it 100 times before or more. It's got super glue, and then you've got this, basically an activator. So you just want to spray one end really well, and the other end you're going to use the glue. Try not to get it to come out underneath and stick to the floor. So we'll just get that lined up where we want it, and we'll give that a good press together. A little bit of glue, and then pull in your leg and give it a little hold. I can make my next one up on here as well. Just use some of my offcuts to keep them away, and then we can. So we've got a little production line going, which is something I always like. And the one underneath is going to keep me roughly where I want to be in terms of the position. So we're just going to go for this. And glue our miters. That's great. And we'll glue that one together as well. That's that, that's perfect. That one's gone off. And this one is going and going and going and gone. So you can see it's lovely and quick, super strong. Go for another one. The old activator sucks straight into the MDF. You want to really make sure that it's on there. So it goes off in a flash. Someone said recently if they run out, they use hairspray, women's hairspray. Or men's hairspray, I suppose some men use hairspray. Not me, look at the state of my old mop. I've got a lockdown haircut. Never seen so many bad hair days. And of course, using these little MDF offcuts, it keeps everything nice and true. I like to use a good quality MDF architrave and skirting. It's one of those things that you can find it a third of the price of somewhere else for the same stuff, but actually make sure if you're paying a high price, get a decent quality, because yeah, some of the stuff is just as furry as anything, and it's just, painters really hate it. It's meant to make their life easier, but actually when they've got to start rubbing the face down, that's bad news. And it's generally where they profile it and they mold it through into the inside, and it can be really bad. So there's the 4 sets done. So now I'm going to prepare the opening. Well, there's not a lot to prepare, but I'm going to put some adhesive around now. So what I want to be using is an adhesive that isn't going to skin. It's going to give me a little bit of time. It doesn't want to be too firm, too hard. So I will use some multi-stick. I like this one. It's a polymer adhesive. Hybrid polymers is what I'm going to. Let me just show you that. It's just lovely and gloopy. It takes up a bit of space, but equally it'll push fairly flat too. So I'll just clean that off. And all we're doing is we're going to give ourselves a bit of adhesion against the plaster here. Give ourselves a bit of a bead there. And what that's going to do, as soon as I put that up, it's going to grab it for me. And it's going to hold it in place until I get my nails ready. So when I was younger, when I started my time in the 80s, we used to put all of our architraves up with nails, oval nails. And I was talking to a young chippy the other day, and he said to him, "Have you seen an oval nail?" And he says, "No, I haven't." And I couldn't believe it, but actually, I can't remember the last time I saw an oval nail. So the other thing you could do now, if you wanted to, is bond back to the lining as well. Now this is also pretty good, this adhesive, for that, because of the fact if you use the gun dead flat, because you don't actually want any thickness of adhesive here really, not like we do on the wall, but you can just pretty much go to the top of the lining and just put yourself a really skinny bead there, flat against the material. First of all, I'm going to show you the 18 gauge. Okay. Now these guns will go up to 54 millimeters, this particular gun. And the PAS load, the 16 gauge, would go up to 64 millimeters, so you can get a longer fixing. I've got a nose on here. Don't really need it with the MDF because the MDF doesn't bruise so much like softwood. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to just make sure, I'm going to get an offcut and nail through it and make sure it's set up right. I'm just going to give that a fixing through there just to make sure I'm happy with it. So the head, this is a bit of a dirty bit of MDF, but the head is weeny, it's absolutely weeny. There's no big breakout or anything like that. I'll just demonstrate a 16 gauge. Let's give it a good bang. There we go. Now, look at the difference between the nail head there and the pin head there, the brad there and the brad there. So there's quite a difference there. So that's why I like to prefer to fix my architraves with the 18 gauge. We're going to pick our frame up. So you just want to carry it from the middle somewhere, and you just want to carefully walk it up, stand it on the floor, and we'll just give it a little press back into position. So straight away it's holding itself up for me, which is lovely. So we're going to get ourselves a pin in at the top here. Then on the leg, on the middle there, one on the margin line here, and then on the bottom on the margin line. Then you can just make sure it's nice and flat against the lining and just add a few more pins where you need them. Also, we've got a rapid fire. It's a bit sort of, I suppose for architraving, if I just press that button there, which means that I can keep my finger on the trigger and just push. So you just got to be a bit careful. It takes a bit of practice, but you save a second or so. So that's one side of architrave done. I'm going to get the rest done now. Here I'm going to use the 16. If I can get the 16 to fire, I shall use the 16 to show you the difference it is in size of the nail head. Oh, come on. Let's check the gas. It's not cold. It's a little bit cold. Let's give it a little. I always think you should best not to store these inside the gun because sometimes I think they leak. Not leak, but if they're sort of letting by. That feels pretty empty, but it was only a new one I changed recently. Let's have a little look. No, it's not going to have it. There we go. Now there you go, you can see the difference. Another one on this side. There we go. It's a much, much bigger hole. Obviously it's a bigger fixing. Still a nice machine though. That was the gas. It was just a little bit on the cold side. So that's the difference, is mainly the head size obviously, but for second fixing architrave especially, where you're nailing directly back into a timber lining, 18 gauge is perfect. I like both types. I like the 16. I like the 18, but in percentage terms, it's 80% of my time using this one now. I just like the smaller head, and because the adhesives are so good now, then I don't need to rely on the strength of the nail. It's more about positioning and connecting together. I've also used this recently on some hardwood, and it was absolutely fantastic on hardwood. You almost couldn't even see the fixing. Nothing more than a bit of French polishing wax to solve the problem of the heads. So I'm going to get on now, finish the job, pack my gear away, get home and chill out. See you all soon on the next one.